The CEO's nephew slashed 18% from my paycheck with a single line in the payroll system, then called me non-value-adding overhead to my face. I didn't argue, I just signed. They thought I was another nameless cog in their $141 million machine connecting 19 critical vendors. They had no idea who actually held the kill switch. One email right recipient, right clause, right timing, and their precious vendor network shifted to null status while the investors watched on screen. My name is Riley Madsen, and for 6 years, I was the invisible backbone of Orion Ledger's vendor orchestration system. Every Monday at 9:30 a.m. sharp, I'd walk into the mahogany-paneled conference room for our operations meeting, armed with my compliance reports and integration metrics. That morning in March, my nameplate wasn't on the table. "Budget optimization," Chase Cutler announced, not even looking up from his phone as I stood in the doorway. The CEO's 28-year-old nephew had given himself the title Director of Innovation 3 months ago. "We're streamlining attendance. Legacy staff can read the minutes." Legacy staff, 6 years of building their vendor network from scratch, and I'd become legacy overhead. I returned to my basement office, yes, literally in the basement, next to the server room, and found the memo already waiting in my inbox. "Personnel Cost Restructuring Initiative," screamed from the subject line. My eyes skipped past Chase's corporate word salad to the number that mattered: negative 18% salary adjustment, effective immediately. The justification was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. Position identified as non-critical support function. Compensation realigned to market rate for administrative roles. Administrative. They'd reclassified my orchestration architect position as administrative. I pulled up my payroll portal. The number staring back at me was already smaller. No discussion, no warning, no performance review, just Chase's digital signature authorizing the cut. Graham Cutler, the actual CEO and Chase's uncle, was CC'd on the memo. His response, timestamped 2 minutes after Chase sent it, approved, good initiative on cost control. I sat in my windowless office, listening to the servers hum through the wall. 6 years ago, I'd architected the entire vendor integration framework that now processed over $140 million in annual transactions. 19 vendors, from payment processors to compliance validators, all dancing in perfect synchronization because I'd written the orchestration rules. I'd documented every API handshake, mapped every dependency, negotiated every service-level agreement. But documentation is invisible. Architects who work in basements don't get invited to leadership retreats. And when the CEO's nephew needs to justify his salary by cutting costs, the non-value-adding overhead makes an easy target. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out the leather notebook where I'd been tracking every system change, every vendor update, every configuration modification for the past 6 years. Not because anyone asked me to. The official documentation system was a joke, but because I needed to know how the pieces fit together. My fingers traced the tabs I'd added over the years: vendor contracts, integration maps, compliance matrices, and one section I'd labeled simply CYA. Cover your ass. The first rule of corporate survival. That afternoon, Chase strutted through the basement hallway with 2 of his innovation team members' kids, fresh from their MBA programs, who talked about disrupting fintech, but couldn't read a basic JSON response. He stopped at my door. "No hard feelings about the adjustment," he said, flashing that entitled smile. "We all have to make sacrifices for the company's future, though between us, you might want to start thinking about your own future. The industry's moving fast. Not everyone can keep up." I looked up from my screen, met his eyes, and said nothing. Just noted the time in my notebook, 3:47 p.m. Chase Cutler suggests I consider my future. He shifted uncomfortably in my silence, then walked away laughing with his disciples about something on his phone. I turned back to my screen and pulled up a folder buried deep in my personal drive: Halcyon Switch LLC. Formation Documents, a small consulting company I'd created years ago, back when I was still naive enough to think Orion might value my contributions enough to contract me as a specialist. They'd hired me full-time instead, and I'd let the LLC dormant. Almost dormant. There was one document where Halcyon's switch still appeared buried in Schedule E of the Master Orchestration Addendum from 2022, a clause I'd inserted when I was still being treated as a valued contributor. A tiny detail about continuity and assignment rights that nobody had bothered to read. I closed the folder and went back to my compliance reports. Let them think I was just another bitter employee counting down to retirement. They had no idea I'd been counting something else entirely. The leadership retreat at Lake Cedar Line was supposed to be for key stakeholders only. I wasn't invited, of course, but I had to drive up anyway to deliver the compliance audit files that Evelyn Pike, our CFO, had forgotten. The irony of being too unimportant to attend but important enough to make a 3-hour drive on a Saturday wasn't lost on me. I found them on the deck overlooking the lake, Chase holding court with his innovation team while the senior leadership nursed their cocktails. I stayed in the parking lot, texting Evelyn that her files were at the concierge desk, but windows were open, and Chase's voice carried, "The beauty of optimization," he was saying, "is identifying the barnacles on the ship. Take Madsen, for example, classic basement dweller, probably been doing the same Excel sheet since 2010. We're paying her to basically be a human filing cabinet." Someone laughed, multiple someones. "I call them the aunties in the basement," Chase continued. "They think knowing where old files are stored makes them irreplaceable. Meanwhile, we could replace her entire job with a SharePoint folder and a junior analyst." I sat in my car, engine off, listening to my professional worth reduced to a punchline. The fury that rose in my chest was cold, crystalline, precise. Not the hot rage that makes you slam doors and send resignation emails. This was the kind that makes you open folders you haven't touched in years. Back home that night, I spread my notebooks across the dining table. 6 years of meticulous documentation, but now I was looking for something specific. I found it in my 2022 notes, detailed across 4 pages of technical specifications and contract negotiations. The Master Orchestration Addendum had been my baby, a comprehensive framework that defined how all vendor relationships would be managed, maintained, and transitioned, buried in Schedule E. Continuity and assignment protocols was a section I drafted after watching another company implode when their primary architect rage quit without documentation. The clause was elegant in its simplicity if the designated orchestration architect departed without a formal successor attestation filed within 30 days. An escrow event gamma could be triggered. This would require all integrated vendors to temporarily suspend configuration changes, revoke administrative tokens, and transfer management authority to the licensed entity holding the orchestration framework until the contracting company could demonstrate proper continuity protocols. The beautiful part. When I drafted this as an independent contractor through Halcyon Switch LLC, I'd insisted on retaining the framework licensing rights. Orion had full usage rights, of course, but Halcyon Switch remained the license holder. It was meant to be a protection for both parties, ensuring smooth transitions and preventing system chaos. Graham Cutler had signed it without reading. Chase probably didn't even know it existed. I pulled up the vendor contact database, cross-referencing it with my handwritten logs. 19 primary vendors, each with their own integration points, dependency chains, and escalation protocols, payment processors that handled millions in daily transactions, compliance validators that kept us aligned with federal regulations, data aggregators that fed our real-time dashboards, identity verification services that onboarded every new client. Each vendor had received a copy of the Master Orchestration Addendum as part of their contract. Each had agreed to honor Schedule E. I opened my laptop and navigated to the escrow agent's portal, a neutral third party we designated to handle continuity events. My credentials still worked. The successor attestation folder sat empty, as it had for years. No secondary architect had ever been designated. Chase's innovation team didn't even know the role existed. In my notebook, I drew a simple timeline. Today was day 12 since my salary cut. If I submitted my resignation on Monday, the 30-day clock would start. But I wouldn't just resign. I'd follow the exact protocols I'd designed, file my departure notification with the escrow agent. Update the license holder information to reflect Halcyon Switch LLC's active status, and wait. The elegant part was that I wouldn't be breaking anything. No malicious code, no deleted files, no sabotage. I'd simply be following the contract everyone had signed. The system would protect itself, exactly as designed. I pulled up Chase's latest all-hands email about the exciting transformation ahead and his plans to modernize our vendor relationships with cutting-edge no-code solutions. He had no idea that every vendor relationship was governed by a document he'd never read, with protocols he didn't know existed, managed by someone he'd just called a basement-dwelling auntie. I closed my notebooks and poured myself a glass of wine. Through my window, I could see the lights of downtown Brook Hollow, Orion Ledger's logo glowing from the top floor of their building. Let them think I was beaten. Let them joke about the barnacle they'd scraped off their ship. They were about to learn that some barnacles are actually load-bearing. The HR meeting was scheduled for Monday at 2 p.m., exactly 1 week after the salary cut. Diane from Human Resources had that practice sympathy face, the one they must teach in HR certification courses. The severance package was already printed, sitting in a folder with my name labeled on the tab. "We want to make this transition as smooth as possible," Diane said, sliding the folder across the table. 3 months severance at your adjusted rate, health insurance through the end of the quarter, and of course, we'll provide a positive reference for your job search. Chase wasn't there. Of course he wasn't. "I appreciate the package," I said, flipping through the pages with deliberate calm. "I'll need the complete exit documentation, though, access revocation schedules, vendor contact transition list, and the escrow instructions for the orchestration framework." Diane blinked. "I'm sorry, the what?" "The escrow instructions for Schedule E compliance. It's part of the master orchestration addendum." I kept my voice patient, helpful even. "You'll need to file the successor attestation within 30 days of my departure. Who's been designated as the architectural successor?" She shuffled through her papers. I don't have that information. Chase handles all the technical transitions." "Of course he does." I signed the severance agreement, then pulled out my own folder. "Here's my transition documentation. Everything's been updated through close of business Friday. I've included a note about the Schedule E requirements just to be helpful." What I'd actually done was perfectly legal and completely thorough. Every document was time-stamped, every access credential cataloged, every vendor relationship mapped, and on page 47, in the section about compliance requirements, I'd added a small banner in corporate-approved formatting. "Warning. Configuration changes during escrow event window without filed successor attestation will be logged as compliance violations per Schedule E, Section 3.2.1. Diane barely glanced at it. "This is very comprehensive. Thank you for being so professional about this." Professional. I almost laughed. "One more thing," I said, pulling out a notarized document. "This is an update to the license holder information for the orchestration framework. Halcyon Switch LLC needs to be reflected as the active license holder in all vendor communications. It's always been the license holder, but the contact information needs updating since I won't have my Orion email anymore." "Is this really necessary?" Diane asked, looking overwhelmed by the paperwork. "It's contractual," I said simply. "The vendors will expect proper notification." She added it to the pile. "We'll process all of this by end of day." I packed my personal items into a single banker's box. 6 years fit depressingly easily into cardboard. The notebooks went in first. Then the few personal items I'd kept on my desk, a photo from the one company party where they'd acknowledged my work. A coffee mug with a coding joke no one else understood. The stress ball shaped like a server that our old CTO had given me as a joke. As I waited for security to escort me out standard procedure, Diane assured me I made one last update to the documentation repository. Not a change, just a simple view of the successor attestation template, downloading it to ensure it was cached in the system logs. The timestamp would show I'd accessed it at 3:23 p.m. on my last day, a digital breadcrumb for anyone smart enough to follow the trail. The security guard was apologetic as he walked me to my car. "Nothing personal, Ms. Madsen, just protocol. I designed the protocol, I told him. Section 12.4 of the Security Compliance Manual. He looked at me with something like respect. You wrote that. I wrote most of it, the good parts, anyway. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open to the escrow agent's portal. Everything was in place. The departure notification had been filed. The license holder update was processing. The 30-day countdown had officially begun. But I wasn't done being helpful. I composed an email to the 19 vendor relationship managers, the ones I'd worked with for years, the ones who actually knew my value. The subject line was innocuous, transition notification, Riley Madsen departure. The body was purely informational. I was leaving Orion Ledger effective immediately, per the Master Orchestration Addendum. Schedule E. Section 2. They should expect a successor attestation within 30 days. In the meantime, Halcyon Switch LLC remained the license holder of record for the orchestration framework. Any questions about continuity protocols should be directed to the escrow agent. I didn't mention what would happen if no successor attestation appeared. I didn't have to. The contract spoke for itself. Before hitting send, I added one last line. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. I'm confident Orion's innovation team will maintain the same standards of excellence going forward. Sometimes the most devastating wounds are delivered with a smile. I queued the email to send at 9 a.m. the next morning, when I knew Chase would be in his weekly innovation showcase, too busy disrupting things to notice the first domino falling. Then I closed my laptop, poured myself a bourbon, and started a 30-day countdown of my own. The cracks started small, like hairline fractures in glass before it shatters. Day 15. Post-departure. Chase's no-code ninjas pushed a new client onboarding flow into production. They'd bypassed the staging environment too slow. Too many approvals required. The old way, the basement-dwelling way. The success rate dropped by 0.7%. Doesn't sound like much until you multiply it by 12,000 daily transactions. 84 failed onboardings. 84 angry potential clients. 84 support tickets flooding the queue. I watched it all from my coffee shop downtown. Logged into the public status dashboard that marketing had insisted on building. Real-time transparency. They'd called it. Real-time entertainment. I called it now. The Slack messages started appearing in the screenshots that a former colleague, one of the few who knew my value, kept sending me. Anyone know why the Payflow integration is throwing timeout errors? Getting weird responses from the compliance validator. Says our tokens are in transition state. Has anyone successfully pushed a config change today? Mine keep getting queued but never process? Miles Garber, the CTO, finally chimed in on day 18. We need to review the vendor integration protocols. Something about a continuity window. Chase, your team made recent changes. Chase's response was pure hubris. We're modernizing the architecture. Some friction is expected when you're removing legacy dependencies. Legacy dependencies. If only he knew. Day 22 brought the first serious warning. Evelyn Pike scheduled an emergency compliance review after 3 failed auditor queries about attestation documentation. She pulled in legal, which meant Jordan Wu, the junior counsel who actually read contracts, got involved. I was grocery shopping when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I recognized Jordan's nervous voice immediately. Ms. Madsen, I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm reviewing the Master Orchestration Addendum, and there's this Schedule E section. I can't provide official consultation without a contract, I said carefully, selecting avocados. But all the documentation should be in the transition folder I prepared. It is, but who owns the license for the orchestration framework? The document says Halcyon Switch LLC, but that can't be right. Check the formation documents from 2022. Everything was disclosed and signed. Silence, then, oh my God. Is there anything else, Jordan? The 30-day window. It ends in 8 days. Then you should probably find someone to file that successor attestation, I said mildly. Have a good afternoon. Day 25 was when the panic truly set in. Miles called an all-hands technical meeting at 7 a.m. Even Chase showed up on time. His usual smugness replaced with something that looked like fear. Someone had finally read Schedule E completely, not just the continuity requirements, but Section 4.3, the penalty clauses. Every unauthorized configuration attempt during an active escrow event would shorten the resolution window. They'd made 17 attempts. The 30-day window was now down to 9 days. 6 hours. Can't we just override it? Chase demanded. It's our system. We don't own the framework license, Miles said quietly. We have usage rights. Halcyon Switch owns the architecture. So buy it from them. Jordan cleared his throat. Halcyon Switch LLC is wholly owned by Riley Madsen. The screenshots stopped coming after that. My former colleague said the meeting had dissolved into what HR would later call unproductive crosstalk. Chase had apparently used several words that would feature prominently in his own HR review. Day 27 brought a call from Graham Cutler himself, the CEO who'd approved my salary cut without a second thought. Riley, he said, with the false warmth of someone who suddenly needs something, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Oh. This whole Schedule E situation, surely we can work something out. You've always been reasonable. Reasonable, like when they'd cut my salary 18% without discussion. I'm happy to discuss licensing arrangements, I said. My consulting rate is $800 per hour, with a minimum 40-hour engagement. The framework license itself is a separate negotiation. That's extortion. That's market rate for specialized orchestration architecture. You're welcome to hire someone else, of course, though they'll need to build a new framework from scratch. The current one will lock in. I checked my watch. 6 days and 14 hours. He hung up. Day 28 brought the lawyers. Orion's legal team sent a thick envelope of cease and desist letters, threatening action for malicious interference with business operations. I forwarded it to my own lawyer, who sent back a one-page response containing exactly 2 sentences. My client has taken no action beyond sending legally required notifications per existing contracts. Please see Master Orchestration Addendum, Schedule E, which your client signed. Day 29, the countdown timer on my laptop showed 37 hours remaining. Chase's team made one last desperate attempt to bypass the system, trying to deploy directly to production servers. The system logged it as critical violation attempt during escrow event window. The resolution window shortened to 9 hours. Tomorrow was the quarterly investor call, the one where Chase was supposed to present his innovation roadmap, the one where they'd showcase the streamlined operations that justified all those cost cuts. I pulled up the escrow agent's portal one last time. The notice of non-assignment was already drafted. Waiting. One click would notify all 19 vendors simultaneously that no successor attestation had been filed. One click would activate escrow event Gamma. One click would turn their $141 million vendor network into a perfectly preserved, completely inaccessible museum piece. I saved the draft and closed my laptop. Tomorrow would come soon enough. Tonight, I had bourbon to drink and a countdown to watch. The Route 7 diner had been my thinking spot for years. Vinyl booths cracked with age, coffee that could strip paint, and absolutely no one from Orion Ledger would ever set foot there. At 8:45 a.m., with the investor call scheduled for 10. I opened my laptop one final time. The email was already perfect. I'd crafted it with the same precision I'd once used to build their entire vendor ecosystem. Subject line: Notice of non-assignment and license reversion escrow event Gamma Schedule E. Recipients: 19 vendor relationship managers, plus the escrow agent. Each email address verified twice. No room for error. The body was ruthlessly professional. Dear valued partner, per the Master Orchestration Addendum 2022, Schedule E, Section 3, this serves as formal notification that no valid successor attestation has been filed within the required 30-day period following the departure of the designated orchestration architect. Effective immediately upon receipt of this notice, please implement the following protocols. 1. Suspend all configuration change permissions for Orion Ledger accounts. 2. Revoke all administrative tokens issued to Orion Ledger personnel. 3. Transition all systems to Managed by License Holder status. 4. Queue all pending modifications for review by Halcyon Switch, LLC. These measures remain in effect until Orion Ledger provides documented evidence of continuity compliance as specified in Schedule E. Section 5. Attached. Please find Schedule E of the Master Orchestration Addendum. Certificate of License Holder, Halcyon Switch, LLC. Affidavit of non-receipt of successor attestation. No service interruption is required. All existing data flows and standard operations continue under current SLAs. Only administrative access and configuration changes are affected. Thank you for your compliance with contractual obligations. Regards, Riley Madsen, Managing Member, Halcyon Switch, LLC. I'd attach the documents with surgical precision. Every page watermarked, every signature highlighted, every relevant clause bookmarked for easy reference. These vendors had legal teams who actually read contracts. They'd understand immediately. My phone buzzed, a text from my former colleague. They're setting up the investor call now. Chase is presenting his Q2 innovation metrics. I took a sip of coffee, watching the countdown timer on my screen, 0:58:43. The beauty of email scheduling is its reliability, but I wasn't scheduling this one. This required the personal touch, the deliberate precision of manual execution, like a conductor raising a baton before the crescendo. Another buzz. Miles just asked Chase about the attestation. Chase said it's technical debt from a previous resource. Graham backed him up. Technical debt, previous resource. They still didn't understand that they were about to face a margin call on that debt. I pulled up Orion's investor relations page on my phone. They were live streaming the call transparency for stakeholders. The conference room camera showed the executive team arranging themselves around the polished table. Chase at Graham's right hand. His laptop open to what looked like dashboard metrics. Evelyn Pike reviewing papers. Miles Garber tight-lipped and pale. 43 minutes until the call started. I reviewed the vendor list one more time. Payflow Solutions, 8 million in monthly transactions. Qualified Compliance Corp, every regulatory filing. DataStream Analytics, the entire business intelligence platform. Secure Verify Systems, all customer identity verification. The list went on. Each vendor had their own SLA, their own escalation procedures. But they all had one thing in common: they'd agreed to Schedule E. They'd recognized that orchestration architecture wasn't just code. It was intellectual property that required careful transition management. My phone rang. Graham Cutler again. 20 million, he said without preamble. For the license? Full transfer. Sign it over now. 20 million for 6 years of work they'd valued at 18% less than nothing. Mr. Cutler, the investor call starts in 38 minutes. Even if we agreed to terms now, legal documentation would take days. The escrow event triggers in, I checked my timer, 31 minutes. You planned this. I planned for proper continuity management. You chose to ignore it. I'm simply following the contract your company signed. What do you want? Nothing. I want it to be valued appropriately. That window closed when Chase called me a basement-dwelling auntie, and you approved cutting my salary for being non-value-adding overhead. Now I'm just ensuring contractual compliance. This will destroy the company. No, it won't. Your vendors will continue operating. Your customers won't see any interruption. You just won't be able to make any changes until you properly document continuity procedures and negotiate appropriate licensing terms. Think of it as technical debt coming due. He started to speak, but I cut him off. The investor call is starting soon. You should probably prepare to explain why your innovation team can't actually innovate anything in your core platform. I hung up. 29 minutes. The diner's coffee maker hissed. The morning sun slanted through dirty windows. On my laptop screen, the email waited patiently, cursor blinking in the send button. I thought about 6 years of basement offices, 6 years of building something critical while being treated as invisible, 6 years of documentation that no one read. Systems no one understood. Architecture no one valued. Until now, 25 minutes. On the live stream, investors were joining the call. I recognized several names, major stakeholders who'd been promised revolutionary efficiency gains from Chase's innovation initiatives. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to each vendor's status page. 19 tabs, 19 green lights showing operational. In a few minutes, those green lights would shift to amber administrative access suspended continuity event in progress. Not read, never read. I wasn't destroying anything. I was preserving it, perfectly, like an insect in amber. They could look at their beautiful system, watch it run, but they couldn't touch it, couldn't change it, couldn't innovate it. The timer read 15 minutes. I closed all the browser tabs except the live stream. On camera, Chase was pulling up his presentation. Transformative efficiency, the innovation roadmap, splashed across the screen behind him. I allowed myself a small smile. Then I moved my cursor to the send button. The investor call began at 10 a.m. sharp. Graham Cutler's practiced CEO voice filled the live stream, welcoming stakeholders to another transformative quarter at Orion Ledger. Behind him, the wall monitor displayed real-time dashboards, transaction volumes, compliance metrics, vendor network status, all green, all operational. Chase stood up, clicker in hand, his title card reading Director of Innovation in bold letters beneath his name. Today, I'm excited to share how we're revolutionizing our technical infrastructure while significantly reducing operational costs. I watched the timer on my laptop 000947. As you can see, Chase gestured to the dashboard. We've achieved an 18% reduction in personnel costs while maintaining full operational capacity. That's when the first email hit. Jordan Wu's face went white as he checked his phone. He passed it to Miles, whose expression shifted from confusion to horror. Chase, oblivious, clicked to his next slide. Our modernized vendor integration platform. We need to pause, Miles interrupted, his voice cracking. We're in the middle of the investor presentation, Graham hissed. The vendors are sending notices, all of them. I watched as 19 email notifications cascaded across the vendor status dashboard they'd foolishly left visible on the live stream. One by one, the green lights shifted to amber, not red amber. Administrative access suspended continuity event in progress. Chase tried to switch the dashboard view. The screen flashed, permission denied, continuity window active. What's happening? An investor's voice crackled through the speaker. Evelyn Pike was frantically typing on her laptop. I can't access the financial integration dashboard. It says my credentials are in transition state. Mine too, someone off camera said. All vendor portals are locked. Graham maintained his composure, barely. We're experiencing a minor technical synchronization. Chase, explain the situation. Chase clicked his remote repeatedly, trying to advance his presentation. The screen remained frozen on the vendor dashboard, amber lights pulsing like a heartbeat. There seems to be a configuration issue. It's not a configuration issue, Miles said quietly, but the microphone caught it. It's Schedule E. The escrow event triggered. English, please, an investor demanded. Jordan Wu cleared his throat. According to our vendor contracts, when the designated orchestration architect leaves without proper succession documentation, the vendors implement protective protocols. We have had 30 days to file attestation. We didn't. So file it now, Graham snapped. We can't. We don't have a designated successor, and every unauthorized attempt to bypass the system has shortened our window. We're down to... Jordan checked his phone. 6 minutes and counting. The countdown timer appeared on the main screen, somehow pulled from the system logs. Red numbers ticking down 000552. Who's the architect? Get them back, an investor shouted. Riley Madsen, Miles said. We adjusted her position 3 weeks ago. Adjusted. Cut her salary by 18% and removed her from leadership meetings, Evelyn admitted. Chase classified her as inessential overhead. The silence was deafening. Then, the lead investor's voice, cold as winter. "You're telling me you pushed out the person who controls your entire vendor infrastructure?" Chase tried to salvage. "We can override this. It's our system." "We don't own it," Jordan interrupted, past caring about hierarchy. "The orchestration framework is licensed from Halcyon Switch LLC, which is owned by Ms. Madsen. Get her on the phone, now." "We tried. She's following the contract." The timer hit 000300. Graham stood up, his CEO composure finally cracking. "There has to be a way to stop this." "There is," Miles said. "We file a successor attestation with someone qualified to manage the architecture." "Then do it." "With whom Chase's no-code ninjas, they don't even know what language the system is written in." 00200. On my laptop, I pulled up the escrow agent's confirmation page. 19 vendor confirmations had already arrived, each one following Schedule E to the letter, each one protecting their own interests by following the contract. 00130. "Can we still operate?" an investor asked. "Yes," Jordan answered. "Everything continues running. We just can't change anything. No updates, no modifications, no new integrations. The system is essentially frozen." "For how long?" "Until we negotiate new terms with the license holder." 010. Chase slammed his laptop shut. "This is extortion. She planned this." "She planned for continuity," Miles corrected. "We planned for cost-cutting." 030. The conference room erupted in crosstalk, investors demanding explanations, Graham demanding solutions, Chase demanding anyone's head on a platter. 0015. I watched them scramble like ants whose hill had been kicked. 6 years of being invisible, and suddenly I was the only thing they could see. 010. Evelyn Pike said something about emergency procedures. Jordan Wu mentioned injunctive relief. Miles Garber just put his head in his hands. 005. The timer turned red. 003. 002. 000. The main display flashed once, then displayed a single message across all connected systems. Vendor network status suspended per escrow event schedule. E-license holder, Halcyon Switch LLC management, restricted pending attestation. In the conference room, every laptop screen went to the same display, every dashboard, every monitor, the $141 million vendor web, perfectly preserved, completely inaccessible. The investor call went silent. Then, the board chairman's voice, measured and lethal. Mr. Cutler, both of you remain on the line. Everyone else, dismissed." The live stream cut off. I sat in the Route 7 diner for another hour, watching the aftermath unfold through various channels. My phone buzzed continuously calls from Orion numbers I didn't answer. Texts from former colleagues I didn't read. The only notification I paid attention to was the escrow agent's final confirmation. Escrow event Gamma successfully initiated. 19 vendor confirmations received. License holder notification complete. The email itself was a masterpiece of simplicity. One click had sent it simultaneously to all 19 vendors, the escrow agent, and because I believed in transparency to Orion's legal department, no malice, no emotion, just contractual facts delivered with surgical precision. Within minutes, the responses had poured in. Pay-flow solutions. Acknowledged. Administrative access suspended per Schedule E. Data stream analytics. Confirmed. Orion Ledger accounts transition to restricted status. Secure verify systems. Escrow protocols activated. Awaiting attestation documentation. Each confirmation was a small victory, a validation that contracts matter, that the invisible architecture holding everything together had value. My laptop screen showed the cascade effect in real time through public status pages. Orion's client portal displayed a maintenance notice hastily posted. professionally vague. Their marketing team's social media went dark. The company Slack, according to a screenshot someone leaked to a fintech forum, was in complete meltdown. Can't push the morning patches. Database migration tools are locked out. Even the API documentation is read-only now. How is this even possible? I closed my laptop and signaled for more coffee. The diner's ancient TV was tuned to a business channel. The ticker at the bottom showed Orion Ledger's stock price beginning its descent, not a crash that would have implied system failure. This was worse, a slow bleed, as investors realized the company's entire innovation roadmap had just flatlined. My phone rang again. This time, it was a number I recognized but hadn't heard from in years. Patricia Novak, CEO of Meridian Financial Systems, Orion's biggest competitor. "Riley," she said warmly, "I hear you're now independent. News travels fast." Bad news travels faster. Orion's investors are panicking. Something about their entire vendor infrastructure being frozen. They're experiencing a continuity event, completely standard according to their contracts. She laughed. "Standard? Right. Listen, I remember when you pitched that orchestration framework at the FinTech conference 3 years ago. We were idiots not to hire you then. Interested in a conversation. I'm taking some time to evaluate opportunities." "Of course. But Riley, we actually read contracts here, and we know the difference between overhead and architecture." I told her I'd consider it and hung up. 3 more competitors called in the next 20 minutes. Word was spreading through the fintech community like wildfire. Orion Ledger had locked themselves out of their own infrastructure, and the person holding the keys was taking meetings. At 11:30 a.m., an unmarked town car pulled up outside the diner. Through the window, I watched Graham Cutler emerge, followed by his lawyer, not Jordan Wu, but Martin Sheffield, the senior partner they wheeled out for existential threats. They found me in my booth, coffee still steaming, completely unsurprised by their arrival. "Ms. Madsen," Sheffield began formally, "we need to discuss terms." "Sit," I said, gesturing to the cracked vinyl seats across from me. "Coffee." Graham's face was a study in controlled rage. "You've made your point." "I haven't made any point. I've simply followed the contract your company signed, the contract that protected both parties in case of transition failures." "What will it take?" Sheffield asked, cutting to business. I pulled out a single sheet of paper from my bag. "My consulting rate is $800 per hour. Minimum 1,000-hour engagement to properly transition the architecture. The license transfer for Halcyon Switch's framework is $50 million. $50 million, Graham sputtered. "That's less than half of what you'll lose if your infrastructure stays frozen for a week. Your own investor deck valued the vendor network at $141 million. I'm offering you a bargain." "This is extortion. This is capitalism. You wanted to optimize costs. I'm now an external vendor. You wanted innovation. I'm offering you the chance to actually control your infrastructure. You wanted to remove overhead. Congratulations. I'm now a critical supplier with market leverage." Sheffield reviewed my terms. "These rates are aggressive. They reflect my unique knowledge of your systems. Unless you'd prefer to hire someone else to reverse engineer 6 years of undocumented complexity while your stock price craters." Graham's phone buzzed. He glanced at it and paled. "The board is calling an emergency meeting." "Then you should probably have an answer for them," I said. "My terms are non-negotiable and expire at 5 p.m. today. After that, they double. Double. Every 24 hours. It's called surge pricing. Very innovative. Chase would approve." Sheffield stood up. "We'll need to discuss this with the board." "Of course. You have my email." As they turned to leave, Graham stopped. "You planned this entire thing, from the moment we cut your salary." "No," I said, meeting his eyes. "I planned this the day I realized you'd never see my value until it was gone. The salary cut just started the clock." They left without another word. Through the window, I watched the town car disappear into downtown traffic. My phone showed 47 unread messages: recruiters, competitors, former colleagues, tech journalists who'd somehow gotten my number. The story was spreading beyond fintech. David versus Goliath in the digital age, one blog post called it, "The Architect's Revenge," another proclaimed. But I wasn't thinking about revenge anymore. I was thinking about value, about all the invisible architects in all the basement offices, keeping systems running while executives took credit and cut costs. I opened my laptop one more time and navigated to Halcyon Switch's dormant website. Time to update it. After all, I was about to be very, very busy. The clock on my screen showed 1 p.m., 4 hours until my deadline. 4 hours until Orion Ledger learned that some overhead is actually load-bearing. 4 hours until they understood that the real innovation isn't replacing the architects, it's recognizing them before they architect your replacement. I ordered another coffee and waited. The boardroom at Orion Ledger had never been this quiet. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawled beneath us, indifferent to the corporate catastrophe unfolding on the 42nd floor. It was 4:53 p.m., 7 minutes before my deadline expired and my price doubled. I sat at one end of the polished mahogany table. My single-page contract centered precisely in front of me. At the other end, the entire board of directors stared at their frozen screens, watching their $141 million infrastructure pulse amber like a heartbeat they couldn't restart. Access null managed by license holder Schedule E, repeated across every monitor, every laptop, every tablet in the room. Chase wasn't here. I'd heard from Jordan Wu, who texted me his resignation letter, that Chase had been placed on immediate administrative leave pending a performance review. His innovation team had been disbanded that morning when they'd tried to hack the system and instead triggered additional lockout protocols I'd built into the framework's security layer. Graham Cutler sat to the right of the board chairman, his CEO authority evaporating with each passing minute. The chairman, William Brennan, a 70-year-old veteran who'd built 3 companies from scratch, studied me with something almost like respect. $50 million for the license, Brennan said slowly. $800 per hour for transition, 1,000-hour minimum. For 7 more minutes, I reminded him. Then it's $100 million and $1,600 per hour. You know we'll pay it, he said. We have no choice. You always had choices. You chose to value innovation over infrastructure. You chose to see architects as overhead. You chose to let a 28-year-old nepotism hire determine what and who had value. Evelyn Pike spoke up. Her CFO confidence shattered. The market has already punished us. We're down 37% since the investor call. That's a solvency problem, not a systems problem, I said. I'm here to solve the systems problem. Martin Sheffield slid the signature pages across the table. The board has approved your terms. I didn't reach for the pen, not yet. There's one more requirement, I said. Graham's jaw clenched. You said non-negotiable. This one's non-monetary. I want a public statement, not a press release buried on page 6. A full announcement acknowledging that the orchestration architecture was designed and built by Riley Madsen, that Halcyon Switch LLC is the engineering firm that saved your infrastructure, that the basement-dwelling auntie you dismissed as overhead was actually the architect of your entire vendor ecosystem. That's humiliating, Graham muttered. That's accountability, I corrected. And it's the difference between your company recovering or becoming a cautionary tale at every business school in America. William Brennan leaned back in his chair. You want recognition. I want every invisible architect in every basement office to know their value. I want every CEO who thinks they can optimize away their foundation to think twice. I want Chase's innovation to be remembered as the day ego trumped engineering. 4:57 p.m. Done, Brennan said simply. He looked at Graham. Unless you object to acknowledging reality. Graham said nothing. His signature on my termination paperwork had cost the company $50 million plus consulting fees. His approval of that 18% salary cut had triggered the most expensive lesson in corporate history. I signed the contract at 4:59 p.m. The moment ink hit paper, I opened my laptop and typed a single command into the escrow agent's portal. License transfer initiated. Attestation documents attached. Vendor restoration authorized. Across the boardroom, Screens flickered. The amber lights began shifting back to green. One by one, like dawn breaking, the system came back to life. "Full restoration will take 6 hours," I said, standing. "I'll begin the transition documentation tomorrow at 9 a.m. Please have a workspace prepared that's not in the basement." As I reached the door, William Brennan called out, "Ms. Madsen." I turned. "That Schedule E clause, you wrote it 3 years ago. You saw this coming." "I saw something coming," I admitted. "I just never imagined it would be this easy to trigger. You practically gift-wrapped it when you let Chase near the controls." The boardroom door closed behind me with a soft click. In the hallway, former colleagues who'd ignored me for years stood and applauded. Someone had printed my photo from the company directory and taped it to the wall with "The Architect" written beneath it. I didn't stop to acknowledge them. Heroes don't stay for encores. Down in the lobby, I passed the digital display showing Orion's stock price. It had stabilized, even started climbing as news of the resolution spread. Tomorrow, the financial press would dissect every moment of this disaster. Business schools would teach it as a case study in hubris. Reddit would turn me into a folk hero. But tonight, I just wanted to sit in my apartment with a glass of wine and enjoy the silence of a phone that wouldn't stop ringing. My laptop bag contained a single document, the signed contract that had turned 6 years of invisible architecture into $50 million of undeniable value, plus consulting fees that would fund Halcyon Switch's expansion into a full-service firm. Chase's words echoed in my memory. Barnacles on the ship. He'd been right about one thing: I'd been holding the company together. He just hadn't realized that barnacles aren't parasites. They're part of the ecosystem. Remove them carelessly, and sometimes the whole ship springs a leak. The January wind hit my face as I exited Orion's building for the last time as an employee. Tomorrow, I'd return as a consultant. Next week, as a vendor. Next month, perhaps as a competitor. But tonight, I was just Riley Madsen, the architect who'd proved that the most dangerous person in any organization isn't the one who breaks things. It's the one who knows how everything was built. The Uber driver asked if I'd had a good day at work. "I fixed a critical bug," I told him. "Must have been a nasty one." I smiled, watching Orion Ledger's logo shrink in the rear window. 18% nasty, to be exact. He didn't understand, but that was fine. The people who needed to understand every undervalued architect, every dismissed engineer, every overhead employee who actually held their company together, they would understand perfectly. Sometimes the best revenge isn't breaking the system. It's showing them exactly what happens when the system works without you. The end. Thank you for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this tale of corporate justice, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever been undervalued at work? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments.